The black limousine stopped slowly in front of the small house. The engine stayed on. For a moment, the silence felt louder than the street itself. The man froze at the door, gripping his son's hand a little too tightly. This didn't make sense. Cars like that never came here. Not to this neighborhood. Not to this house. Across the street, curtains shifted. Curious eyes appeared. His mind raced. Police, a mistake, bad news. Something terrible had to be about to happen. All he could think was one simple truth. This all started yesterday, with just $15. If you enjoy emotional stories about hard choices, kindness, and unexpected twists, subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. The morning before, that same man had been walking toward a small supermarket, his son by his side, counting coins in his pocket and hiding his fear of tomorrow. He didn't know it yet, but that moment would become the most important decision of his life. By the time Ethan Carter turned 32, he had learned the strange math of survival. How to stretch $1 into 2 meals, how to turn silence into comfort, and how to smile with a storm behind his eyes. But the hardest lesson came long before the layoff. It began on a rainy night years ago, when his son, Noah, was still small enough to fit in the crook of his arm, still too young to understand why the world had suddenly split in half. The phone call had come after midnight. A woman's voice, gentle, trained, careful, asked him to confirm his name, then his address, then whether he could sit down. Ethan didn't sit. He stood in the kitchen of their one-bedroom rental, staring at a sink full of dishes he'd promised himself he'd wash before bed. Noah was asleep in the next room, the soft rise and fall of his breathing the only steady thing in Ethan's universe. "Mr. Carter," the woman said, "there's been an accident." Ethan remembers the exact second his knees went weak. Not because the words were shocking. Accidents happened every day, but because his body knew before his mind accepted it. His wife, Lily, had been driving home from her late shift. The road near the interstate had been slick. A truck had drifted. Metal had screamed. Glass had shattered. And then, Lily was gone. He didn't even cry at first. Not the way people expected. He just kept saying, "No, no, that's not right." Like facts could be negotiated, like reality could be argued into changing its mind. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights were too bright. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and wet umbrellas. Someone handed him a clipboard. Someone else offered him water he didn't drink. A doctor spoke to him using words that sounded distant and unreal. When Ethan finally saw her, she looked like she was sleeping, too peaceful for a world that had just ripped her away. He leaned close, forehead trembling against her hand, and whispered the only promise he could think of. "I'll take care of him," he said. "I swear I will." That promise became the spine of his life. At first, the days blurred into something he could barely name. Diapers, bills, nights so quiet they felt violent. He didn't have family nearby, and Lily's mother was sick in another state. Friends tried to help, but their sympathy always came with an awkward edge, as if they were afraid grief might be contagious. So Ethan learned to do it alone. He worked construction during the day, coming home with dust in his hair and soreness in his hands, then switching into the second shift of fatherhood without a break. He learned how to hold a bottle with one hand while fixing a leaky faucet with the other. He learned how to cut coupons, how to make a can of soup feel like dinner, how to hide fear behind jokes when Noah asked questions that were too big for a child. "Why don't I have a mommy like Caleb?" Noah once asked, staring up at him with wide, serious eyes. Ethan's throat tightened so hard he thought he might choke. He didn't lie. Not fully. But he didn't tell the whole truth either. "Your mommy loved you more than anything," Ethan said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack. "And I love you enough for both of us." Noah accepted that the way kids sometimes do, like the answer is only as heavy as the voice that gives it. He nodded, then went back to his toy cars. Ethan turned away so Noah wouldn't see his eyes. Years passed. Noah grew taller. The baby softness in his cheeks faded into a little boy's stubbornness. He started school. He learned to tie his shoes, then to ride a bike. Ethan showed up to every parent-teacher meeting with a tired face and work boots still dusty from the job site. And even when the money was tight, especially when it was tight, Ethan tried to make their life feel normal. Friday nights became movie nights, even if the movie was a scratched DVD from the bargain bin. He'd pop popcorn and let Noah stay up late, and for a couple hours, the world felt gentler. Sometimes, when Noah fell asleep on the couch, Ethan would carry him to bed and stand there for a moment, watching his son breathe. That was when the fear came, because Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he ever fell, Noah would fall with him. So he kept going, kept working, kept staying. And for a while, it almost felt like life was finally balancing on its feet. Until the first crack appeared, quietly, like a nail slipping loose in a wooden beam. It happened at the construction site. A missing set of tools. A whispered argument between supervisors. A look from a coworker that didn't feel friendly. It felt sharp. Ethan noticed it, but he didn't understand it yet. Not until someone called his name from across the job site and said 4 words that made his stomach drop. "Ethan, you need to come." And as he walked toward the office, dust sticking to the sweat on his skin, a thought flashed through his mind, unwanted and cold. This is how it starts. He just didn't know how far it was going to go. When Ethan stepped inside the office, the faces waiting for him weren't just serious. They looked like they'd already decided who to blame. The construction site woke up before the sun. By 6 a.m., the air already smelled like concrete dust and hot coffee poured into chipped thermoses. Ethan liked arriving early. It gave him a few quiet minutes before the noise started, before drills screamed, metal clanged, and men shouted over one another like it was the only way to be heard. This job wasn't glamorous. It never had been. But it paid just enough, and for Ethan, that was everything. He worked residential builds, new houses on the edge of town, where streets didn't have names yet and the sidewalks ended in dirt. He framed walls, laid foundations, fixed mistakes other people pretended not to make. He was good at it. Careful. Reliable. The kind of worker supervisors liked because he didn't complain and didn't cut corners. Most days, he kept his head down. Most days. There was one man on the crew who didn't. Mark Lewis had been there longer than Ethan, and he made sure everyone knew it. He laughed louder than necessary, criticized faster than he worked, and treated every small authority like a throne. Mark wasn't stronger or faster, but he was louder, and in construction, that sometimes passed for confidence. At first, Ethan barely noticed him. But over time, small things added up. Tools went missing from Ethan's station, only to reappear days later somewhere else. Supplies he signed out showed up short on inventory lists. Once, a supervisor asked him why he'd taken materials he'd never touched. Ethan explained calmly, "There must have been a mistake." The supervisor nodded, distracted. "Just be careful," he said. Mark watched from across the site, chewing on a toothpick, his eyes unreadable. Ethan told himself it was nothing. He couldn't afford paranoia. Not with Noah depending on him. So he focused on work. On doing everything right. On being early, staying late, and never giving anyone a reason to question him. Still, the tension followed him. Sometimes Mark would clap him on the shoulder a little too hard. "Careful, Carter," he'd say, smiling. "People start noticing things." "Like what?" Ethan asked once. Mark just shrugged. "Like who they can trust." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. The words stuck somewhere deep in his chest, tangled with something colder than anger. At lunch, Ethan sat alone on a stack of lumber, eating a sandwich Noah had helped pack that morning. Peanut butter, cut crooked. A note folded inside the paper towel, drawn in a child's uneven handwriting. "Good luck today, Dad." Ethan smiled despite himself. That smile faded when he saw Mark talking to the foreman near the supply truck. Mark gestured toward the tool shed, toward Ethan's area. His hands moved fast, animated, like he was telling a story he'd rehearsed. The foreman nodded slowly. Something in Ethan's stomach tightened. He stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked back to work. The afternoon passed heavier than usual. Every sound felt sharper. Every glance felt loaded. Near the end of the shift, the foreman called out, "Ethan, office." Conversations around them died instantly. A few heads turned. Someone muttered something under their breath. Ethan felt sweat trickle down his spine, not from the heat, but from instinct. He looked once toward the sky, already fading into late afternoon, and thought of Noah waiting at home. Thought of the bills on the kitchen table. Thought of how carefully he'd built this fragile balance. Then he walked toward the office. Inside, the air was still. Too still. Papers lay spread across the desk. A clipboard. A printed inventory sheet with numbers circled in red. The foreman didn't ask Ethan to sit. He just closed the door behind him. The foreman didn't raise his voice. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if every word had already been chosen long before Ethan walked through the door. "We've got a problem," the foreman said, tapping the inventory sheet with a thick finger. "And your name keeps coming up." Ethan leaned forward, eyes scanning the page. Tool serial numbers, dates, sign-out logs, amounts that didn't make sense. "This isn't right," Ethan said immediately. "I didn't take half of this." The foreman sighed, the way someone does when they're tired of explanations. "According to the logs, you did. Or at least, you signed for them." Ethan shook his head. "Someone else must have. We checked the cameras." That stopped him. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. "The cameras?" The foreman nodded. "Tool shed. Back entrance. You go in. You come out. More than once." A cold wave moved through Ethan's chest. "That's impossible," he said. "I go in there every day. Everyone does." The foreman leaned back in his chair. "We slowed it down. Zoomed in. Looks like you." Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He pictured the shed. The narrow angle. The way workers passed in and out without thinking twice. He suddenly understood how easy it would be to make something look true if you wanted it badly enough. "Let me explain," Ethan said. "Please. I've been missing tools too. Someone's been." The door opened behind him. Mark stepped in. "Oh good," Mark said lightly. "You called him in." Ethan turned. "What are you doing here?" Mark raised his hands. "Relax. I just wanted to help clear things up." The foreman gestured to a chair. "Mark noticed discrepancies last week. He brought them to us." Ethan stared at him. Mark met his gaze, calm, almost kind. Didn't want anyone getting hurt by a misunderstanding. Ethan felt something shift. Not anger. Something sharper. "You said you trusted me," Ethan said quietly. Mark's smile didn't change. "I said I trusted the process." The foreman stood. "Ethan, we can't ignore this. Tools went missing. Company property. Thousands of dollars." "I have a kid," Ethan said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I wouldn't risk my job. I wouldn't." "This isn't personal," the foreman interrupted. "But we have to act." He slid a paper across the desk. "Termination notice. Effective immediately." Ethan didn't touch it. "You're firing me?" he asked. "We're letting you go," the foreman corrected. "Pending further review." Mark cleared his throat. "Probably best for everyone." Ethan stood so fast the chair scraped loudly across the floor. His hands trembled, not with rage, but with disbelief. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You'll see." The foreman looked away. Mark didn't. As Ethan walked out, the sounds of the site rushed back in. laughing, drilling, shouting, like nothing had happened. Like his world hadn't just collapsed in a quiet office with the door closed. He reached his truck and sat there for a long time, forehead pressed to the steering wheel. Then his phone buzzed. A reminder notification. Rent due in 5 days. Ethan exhaled slowly. Somewhere behind him, Mark laughed. Ethan didn't tell Noah the truth right away. That night, he cooked pasta with the last of the sauce in the jar and joked about a short day at work. Noah nodded, more interested in telling him about a drawing he'd made at school than in asking questions. Ethan smiled, listened, and pretended his chest wasn't caving in. After Noah fell asleep, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. 1 application became 2. 2 became 10. He updated his resume, rewrote it again. He listed years of experience. Reliable. On time. Skilled. He avoided the word terminated. Chose seeking new opportunity instead. The first rejection came the next morning. Then another. Some companies didn't respond at all. Others sent polite emails that felt worse than silence. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. We appreciate your interest. Days blurred together. Ethan woke up early anyway. Habit was a hard thing to break. He dropped Noah at school, smiled at the teacher, and drove around town visiting job sites with a folder tucked under his arm. He stood in offices that smelled like fresh paint and old coffee, explaining his situation to people who nodded without really listening. Background checks take time, one manager said. We'll call you, said another. They didn't. At night, Ethan counted numbers. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas. The math never worked, no matter how slowly he did it. By the end of the week, he had pawned his old watch, the one Lily gave him before Noah was born. He told himself it was just metal, just a thing. Still, his hand lingered on the empty spot on his wrist longer than it should have. The fridge grew quieter. Milk became a luxury. Meat disappeared first. Then fruit. Ethan learned how to turn rice into 3 meals and convince Noah it was a game. Breakfast for dinner? Noah laughed one night. Best kind, Ethan said. But when Noah wasn't looking, Ethan skipped his own plate. Each day without work felt heavier than the last. People stopped calling. Friends grew distant, unsure how to help. The world seemed to shrink to the size of their kitchen and the sound of bills sliding through the mail slot. On the 7th day, Ethan checked his wallet. $15. That was it. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. $15 meant one careful trip to the supermarket. Bread, milk, maybe eggs if he was lucky. No room for mistakes. That morning, Noah came into the room fully dressed, backpack already on. Are we going to the store today? He asked. Ethan hesitated. Yeah, he said finally. We are. Noah smiled, unaware of the weight of that answer. They walked instead of driving, the sun low and gentle, the neighborhood unusually quiet. Ethan placed the crumpled bills into Noah's small hand, folding his fingers around them. Hold on to this for me, okay? He said. Noah nodded seriously, as if he'd been given something precious. The supermarket doors came into view, and just outside them, someone was standing still. She stood just to the side of the entrance, where the automatic doors opened and closed without ever touching her. People passed within inches of her shoulder. Some stared straight ahead. Others glanced once, then looked away faster, as if eye contact alone might turn into an obligation. Ethan noticed her immediately. Not because she was loud or dramatic. She wasn't. But because she didn't fit the picture his mind expected. She wasn't old. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't drunk or shouting. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with tired eyes and hair pulled back in a loose, messy knot. Her clothes were wrinkled and slightly dirty, like she'd slept in them, but they weren't rags. She looked normal, too normal to be ignored so completely. Ethan slowed his steps without realizing it. Noah stayed beside him, quiet now, watching. The woman held her hands together in front of her, fingers twisting nervously. Her voice was soft, almost embarrassed, and easy to miss beneath the hum of carts and sliding doors. "Excuse me," she said to a man walking past. "I'm sorry. Could you help me? I just need a little for a taxi. I'm trying to get home." The man didn't stop. Another woman brushed by, eyes fixed on her phone. A couple exited the store laughing, their cart full. They walked straight past her, as if she were invisible. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that look, the one people gave when they decided someone wasn't worth the risk of caring about. He told himself to keep walking. He had $15. 15. That money already had a purpose. Bread, milk, dinner, tomorrow. He looked down at Noah. Noah was staring at the woman, his brow furrowed, his small hand still clenched around the folded bills. He watched as another person ignored her, then another. "Dad," Noah said quietly. Ethan swallowed. "Yeah, buddy. Why is nobody helping her?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He didn't know how. The truth felt too heavy, too complicated for a child who still believed most problems had simple solutions. "Sometimes people don't see," Ethan said finally. Noah nodded slowly, like he was trying to understand something new. They reached the door. The automatic sensor caught them, and it slid open with a mechanical sigh. Cool air rushed out, carrying the smell of bread and disinfectant. Ethan stepped forward. Noah didn't. Ethan felt the gentle pull on his hand and turned back. Noah was no longer beside him. He had taken a step toward the woman. "Noah," Ethan said, sharper than he meant to. But Noah didn't flinch. He just kept walking. Slow, careful steps like he didn't want to startle her. The woman looked up, surprised, as the little boy approached. Up close, Ethan could see more details. The faint redness around her eyes, the way her lips trembled as if she'd been holding herself together for hours. She didn't look dangerous. She looked exhausted. Noah stopped in front of her and held out his hand. In his palm, the folded bills looked almost too small to matter, too thin to change anything. But the woman stared at them as if they were the only warm thing she'd seen all day. I can't," she whispered at first, shaking her head. "Sweetheart, you should keep that. That's yours." Noah frowned. "It's for food," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Ethan's heart dropped. The woman's eyes snapped to Ethan, and for a split second, Ethan wished the ground would open. He wanted to pull Noah away, apologize, pretend none of it happened, walk inside and buy the cheapest food he could find before the money vanished. But Noah stepped closer and pressed the bills toward her anyway. "You look like you need it more," Noah said. Ethan felt his throat tighten. That sentence hit harder than any punch. Because it was true, and because it wasn't. They needed it too. Ethan moved forward quickly. "Noah, buddy, come here," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm. He stopped, because the woman's face crumpled. Tears slipped down her cheeks without warning, and she covered her mouth like she couldn't believe what was happening. Then she knelt down in front of Noah, careful, respectful, like she was afraid she might scare him away. "Thank you," she said, voice breaking. "You don't understand how much this. Thank you." And then she did something Ethan didn't expect at all. She wrapped her arms around Noah. Not in a dramatic way. Not forceful. Just a quick, trembling hug, like someone holding onto a lifeline for a single second before letting go. Noah patted her shoulder awkwardly, then smiled. Ethan stood frozen. Part of him wanted to intervene, to take the money back, to end this before the day got worse. But another part, an older, quieter part, was watching the tears on her face and thinking of Lily. Thinking of how Lily used to stop for strangers. How she used to hand over her last spare change with a look that said, "We'll figure it out later." Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. The woman pulled back and wiped her face quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Noah said, steady as ever. "My mom cried a lot too." Ethan's breath caught. The woman's eyes softened. "Your mom?" she asked gently. Noah nodded. "She's in heaven. Dad says she loved me more than anything." The woman looked up at Ethan again, and this time her gaze wasn't just grateful. It was searching, like she was trying to understand what kind of man stood behind this child. Ethan finally found his voice, though it came out rough. He's a good kid," Ethan said. The woman swallowed. "So are you," she murmured. Ethan shook his head. "I didn't." But the words died, because in that moment, he realized he still hadn't made his choice. The money was no longer in Noah's hand. It was in hers. And if Ethan took it back now, he'd have to take it from a woman who was crying because his son believed in her. Ethan stared at the bills, then at Noah's face. Open, trusting. Then he slowly nodded. "Keep it," he said quietly. The woman's eyes widened. Are you sure?" Ethan forced himself to breathe. "Just get home safe." The woman clutched the money like it might disappear. "Thank you," she said again, and this time the gratitude sounded like something deeper than words. Ethan turned toward the store doors, forcing his legs to move. Noah followed, but as they stepped inside, Ethan felt it, an ache in his stomach, a fear pressing against his ribs. Because he had just watched his last $15 walk away with a stranger, and he had no idea what he was going to feed his son that night. Inside the supermarket, everything felt louder. The beeping of registers, the squeal of cart wheels, the murmur of conversations, all of it pressed in on Ethan at once. He walked slowly, Noah beside him, both of their hands empty now. Ethan grabbed a basket out of habit, then stopped. There was no reason to carry one. He stood there for a moment, staring at the rows of food as if they were part of a world he'd stepped out of without realizing it. Shelves stacked high with bread, cereal, canned goods, choices he no longer had the luxury of making. Noah looked up at him. "Dad, are we still getting dinner?" Ethan knelt down so they were eye to eye. He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not today, buddy. We'll figure something out at home." Noah nodded, accepting it without complaint. That somehow made it worse. They walked out of the store with nothing. The automatic doors slid open again, letting warm afternoon air wash over them. The woman was gone. No sign of her. No trace that anything extraordinary had happened at all, except inside Ethan's chest. The walk home felt longer than before. Every step echoed with thoughts Ethan tried to push away. He replayed the moment again and again. The money in Noah's hand, the tears, the hug. Part of him wondered if he'd been foolish. Another part, quieter but stubborn, refused to regret it. At home, Ethan made the evening feel like a game. He heated water, added the last of some noodles, and split the small portion between them. He told Noah stories about when he was a kid, about jobs he'd had, about silly mistakes. Noah laughed, and for a few minutes, the weight lifted. Later, after Noah fell asleep, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, listening to his son's steady breathing. "I hope I did the right thing," he whispered into the dark. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound outside made Ethan tense, the distant bark of a dog, a car passing too slowly. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, calculating again and again how long he could stretch what little they had left. Morning arrived quietly. Too quietly. Ethan woke to sunlight spilling through the window and a strange feeling in his chest, like something was wrong. He got out of bed and walked toward the front of the house. That's when he saw it. Not through the window at first, but in the sudden stillness outside. No birds, no traffic, just the low, steady hum of an engine that didn't belong there. The sound came again, low, controlled, expensive. Ethan's hand froze on the doorframe. He leaned closer to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see outside. The street was almost empty. A couple of parked cars, a cracked sidewalk, and right there, in front of his house, impossibly out of place, was a long black limousine. Glossy, immaculate. Its windows were dark, the kind that didn't let you see in. The engine idled softly, like it had all the time in the world. Ethan's first thought wasn't wealth. It was fear. His heart began to pound as his mind raced through every possibility. A mistake. The wrong address. Someone looking for someone else. Or worse, someone who was looking for him. He glanced back toward the bedroom. Noah was still asleep, curled on his side, clutching his pillow. Ethan swallowed and opened the front door. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint smell of asphalt and dew. As soon as he stepped outside, the limousine's rear door opened smoothly. A man in a dark suit stepped out first. Tall, composed. The kind of presence that made everything around him feel suddenly smaller. He adjusted his jacket, then turned back toward the open door. And then she stepped out. Ethan recognized her immediately. The same woman from the supermarket, but transformed. Her hair was neatly styled now, falling over her shoulders. Her clothes were elegant, simple, and clearly expensive. She looked rested, confident, like someone who belonged in a world Ethan had only ever seen from a distance. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he was imagining it. Then she smiled. "Good morning," she said gently. Ethan didn't move. I think you have the wrong house." She shook her head. "No, I don't." She walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "You helped me yesterday," she said. "You and your son." Ethan's mouth went dry. "We didn't do anything special." Her expression softened. "You did more than you know." The man in the suit stepped aside, opening the limousine door wider. "If you'll allow it," he said calmly, "we'd like to invite you and your son to spend the day with us." Ethan stared at him. "I don't understand." The woman took a slow breath. "I know this looks strange," she said, "but I needed to find you, and I needed to do it properly." "Why?" Ethan asked. She met his eyes. "Because yesterday, when everyone else walked past me, you didn't take back what your son gave me." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "I just wanted to help," he said. She nodded. "Exactly." Behind Ethan, a small voice spoke. "Dad." He turned to see Noah standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, staring at the limousine with open wonder. The woman smiled again, this time directly at Noah. "Hi," she said softly. Noah looked up at Ethan. "Is she the lady from yesterday?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes," he said. She crouched down slightly so she was closer to Noah's height. "Thank you again," she said. "Because of you, I made it home." Noah smiled shyly. "And now," she added, standing again, "I'd like to return the kindness, just for today." Ethan looked from the limousine to his son, then back to her. Every instinct told him to say no, but something in her voice, steady, sincere, made him pause. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Ethan's first reaction was to protect. Protect Noah. Protect what little stability they had left. Protect their life from anything that looked too good to be real. His eyes stayed on the limousine like it might suddenly reveal its true purpose, like men in uniforms would step out, like someone would slap handcuffs on him and drag him away while Noah screamed his name. He forced his voice to stay level. "I don't know you," he said to the woman. "I don't even know your name." She nodded as if she'd expected that. "My name is Claire." The way she said it was gentle, almost careful, like she didn't want it to sound important. Ethan didn't relax. "And the man in the suit?" Claire glanced toward him. "That's James. He works for my family." "Works for my family." Those words landed like a stone. "Not my company." Not my boss. Not my friend. My family. Ethan's throat tightened. Where exactly are you taking us? Claire's expression didn't change. Somewhere safe, she said. Somewhere public. A mall. A place Noah will like. And then lunch. That's it. Ethan's instincts still screamed no. But his eyes drifted to Noah, barefoot in the doorway, staring at the limousine like it was a spaceship. Noah was smiling. That smile did something to Ethan. It reminded him of a life before bills and loss and humiliation. It reminded him of Lily's laugh. Of the way she used to make ordinary days feel special just by deciding they were. Ethan looked back at Claire. Why are you doing this? He asked again. People don't just show up in limousines because of $15. Claire's gaze didn't flinch. Yesterday wasn't about $15, she said softly. It was about the kind of person who gives when it hurts. Ethan swallowed. It hurt. Claire nodded once, as if she respected him more for saying it. I know. James cleared his throat quietly. Sir, if you're worried, you can follow us in your vehicle. Ethan almost laughed. His vehicle, his old truck that coughed smoke when it started, that had a cracked side mirror held in place with tape. He looked at the limousine again. Then at Noah. Noah tugged his sleeve. Dad, can we? Ethan crouched down. Buddy, he said, voice low, you know we don't get in cars with strangers. Noah blinked. But she's not a stranger, he whispered. She's the lady we helped. Ethan's chest tightened. Claire waited, giving him space. Ethan stood back up. If we do this, he said carefully, we go for a little while. And if I say we leave, we leave. Claire smiled, small, relieved. Of course. Ethan turned to Noah. Shoes, he said. And a jacket. Noah ran inside, excitement suddenly exploding out of him like he'd been holding it back. Ethan watched him go, then looked at Claire again. Why were you at that supermarket? Ethan asked. Yesterday. Like that. A shadow flickered through her face, so quick it almost didn't show. I had a bad night, she said. A really bad night. And I made a mistake trusting the wrong person. Ethan studied her. Her eyes were clear now, but there was something behind them, like a bruise that hadn't finished forming. What happened? He asked. Claire hesitated. James shifted his weight slightly, as if he knew the story and didn't like where the question might lead. Claire's voice stayed controlled. I was traveling, she said. I stopped at a gas station outside the city. Someone offered help. I let my guard down. They took my bag. My phone, my wallet, everything. Ethan frowned. You went to the police? Claire's lips pressed together. Eventually, she said. But by the time I did, it didn't matter. I was stuck. I couldn't contact anyone. I didn't have ID. I didn't even have money for a ride. Ethan's mind tried to fit the pieces together. If she had people like James, why hadn't they found her sooner? Claire read the question on his face. My family didn't know where I was, she said quietly. And I didn't want them to. Ethan paused. Why? Claire looked away, toward the sky, like she was choosing how much truth to give. Because sometimes, she said, when you come from a certain kind of family, people don't hear you unless you disappear. Ethan didn't fully understand that, but he felt the pain underneath it. Noah came back wearing his sneakers and a hoodie, eyes bright. He held Ethan's hand again, but this time his grip was excited, not nervous. They walked toward the limousine. Up close, it looked even more unreal. The paint reflected the neighborhood like a distorted mirror. Ethan could see himself in it, a man in worn jeans and an old hoodie, standing next to a child who still believed in miracles. James opened the door for them. The inside was quiet, clean, and smelled faintly of leather. Noah climbed in first, wide-eyed. Whoa, he whispered, running his fingers along the seat as if it might vanish. Ethan hesitated at the threshold. Claire looked at him. "You can sit beside him," she said. "I'll sit across." Ethan stepped inside. The door closed with a soft, final sound. And as the limousine pulled away from the curb, Ethan felt a strange twist in his stomach, like he'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He watched the neighborhood slide past the tinted window, smaller and smaller. Noah leaned close to the glass. "Dad," he said, voice full of wonder. Are we rich now?" Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "No, buddy," he said quietly. "We're just going for a ride." Claire, sitting across from them, smiled sadly, as if she knew how dangerous that question really was. Because Ethan didn't know it yet, but this ride wasn't just going to change Noah's day. It was going to expose every lie that had been built around Ethan's life, and every truth he'd been forced to swallow. And somewhere behind all of it, a man like Mark was still walking free, thinking he'd gotten away with everything. The limousine didn't head downtown like Ethan expected. Instead, it drove toward the brighter side of the city, the part where buildings grew taller, streets cleaner, and storefront windows reflected lives that seemed untouched by worry. Ethan watched it all pass in silence, his arm resting lightly around Noah's shoulders. Noah pressed his face to the window, eyes wide. "Dad," he whispered, like he was afraid speaking louder might break something. "Look at that." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't really seeing what Noah was seeing. His mind kept circling the same questions. What's the catch? How does this end? The car slowed in front of a massive shopping center. Glass walls, fountains, people dressed like they were headed somewhere important. James stepped out first and opened the door. Claire exited gracefully, then turned back toward them. "Just for today," she reminded gently. "No expectations." Ethan stepped out, instinctively checking his surroundings, then helped Noah down. The contrast hit him immediately, his worn shoes on polished stone, his reflection faint and distorted in the glass. Inside, the mall buzzed with energy. Music played softly overhead. Laughter echoed. The smell of food wrapped around them like a memory. Noah's head moved in every direction at once. Claire crouched beside him. "What do you like?" she asked. Noah hesitated. "I don't know." She smiled. "Then we'll find out." They started with clothes, not because Ethan wanted to, but because Noah's jacket was thin, his shoes worn. Claire didn't point it out. She simply led them into a store and spoke quietly with a clerk. Minutes later, Noah stood in front of a mirror wearing a new hoodie, clean sneakers, and jeans that actually fit. He stared at himself like he was looking at someone else. "Do I look different?" he asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "You look like you," he said. "Just warmer." Noah grinned. Next came toys. A small store filled with bright colors and shelves stacked high. Noah walked slowly, afraid to touch anything. Ethan watched him, heart heavy, remembering every time he'd said maybe next time. Claire noticed. "You can pick one," she said to Noah. "Anything you want." Noah's eyes widened, but he didn't rush. He walked past shelves of loud, flashy toys until he stopped in front of something simple, a building set. He held it up carefully. "This one." Claire nodded. "That one." Noah hugged the box to his chest like it might disappear. They ate lunch together at a quiet restaurant overlooking the city. Noah ordered pancakes. Ethan ordered coffee and soup, though Claire insisted he eat more. He resisted at first, then gave in, hunger winning over pride. Between bites, Claire listened. She asked about Noah's school, his favorite subject, his drawings. Noah answered eagerly, occasionally glancing at Ethan for approval. Then Claire turned to Ethan. "What about you?" she asked. "What did you want to be when you were young?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "I don't think I ever asked myself that." Claire studied him. "You're good at surviving," she said. "But you never planned for living." The words landed gently, but they stayed. After lunch, They walked past a glass railing overlooking the mall's lower floor. Claire slowed her steps. "You mentioned yesterday that work had been hard," she said casually. "What happened?" Ethan hesitated. Noah was distracted now, watching a small performance below. Ethan lowered his voice. "I lost my job," he said. "I didn't steal anything, but someone wanted me gone." Claire turned toward him fully. "Do you know who?" "Yes." "Do you know how?" Ethan nodded. "Enough." Claire didn't respond immediately. She looked thoughtful, then glanced toward James, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Would you mind," she said carefully, "telling me the whole story later? Not today. Just soon." Ethan studied her face. There was no pity there, no judgment, just interest. "Why?" he asked. Claire met his eyes. "Because I don't believe in coincidences," she said. "And I don't think what happened to you was one." Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and fear. As the afternoon stretched on, Noah laughed more than Ethan had heard in months. At one point, he grabbed Ethan's hand and said, "Dad, this is the best day ever." Ethan smiled, but deep inside, something twisted. Because he knew days like this didn't come for free. And whatever Claire was planning next, it wasn't over yet. The sun was already dipping low when the limousine brought them back. Noah had fallen asleep halfway through the ride, his head resting against Ethan's side, arms still wrapped around the box with his new building set. His breathing was slow and steady, the kind that only comes after a day filled with wonder. Ethan watched the city fade behind tinted glass, his thoughts louder than the engine's hum. When the limousine stopped in front of the house, it looked even smaller than it had that morning. The contrast felt sharper now, like he'd briefly stepped into another life and been returned before he could get comfortable. James opened the door. Claire waited as Ethan gently lifted Noah into his arms. Noah stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Are we home?" he mumbled. "Yeah, buddy," Ethan whispered. "You did good today." Noah smiled in his sleep. Inside, Ethan laid him on the bed, pulled the blanket up to his chin, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. He brushed Noah's hair back, careful not to wake him. When Ethan returned to the living room, Claire was standing near the doorway, hands folded, her posture relaxed but attentive. "I'll have James wait outside," she said softly. "If that's okay." Ethan nodded. The door closed behind James with a quiet click. For the first time all day, it was just the two of them. "Thank you," Ethan said. The words felt insufficient. For him. For today. Claire smiled faintly. "You don't owe me anything." Ethan leaned against the back of a chair. "That's the problem," he said. "I don't understand why you're doing this." Claire took a slow breath. "Yesterday," she said, "I wasn't sure I'd make it home. I'd lost everything that made me feel like myself. And then your son handed me $15 like it was nothing." Ethan shook his head. "It wasn't nothing to us." "I know," Claire said gently. "That's why it mattered." She walked a few steps closer. "When I got home, my father was already tearing the city apart looking for me. Security teams, lawyers, the works." She smiled without humor. "I grew up surrounded by power, money, control. But yesterday, none of that helped me." Ethan listened, arms crossed, unsure where this was going. "The only thing that did," Claire continued, "was kindness." She met his eyes. "And kindness should never come with consequences." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "It does," he said quietly. "Sometimes it costs everything." Claire studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Which is why I asked James to look into your old job." Ethan straightened. "You did what?" "Not officially," she said quickly. "Just questions, records, names." Ethan's pulse picked up. "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know," Claire said. "But you didn't ask to be framed either." The room felt suddenly smaller. "What did you find?" Ethan asked. Claire hesitated. "Enough to know something was wrong," she said carefully. "And enough to know this won't be quick." Ethan let out a slow breath. Part of him wanted to stop her, to say it didn't matter anymore, that he could handle it. Another part, the exhausted part, wanted the truth more than pride. "Why help me?" he asked again. "Really?" Claire looked toward the hallway where Noah slept. Her voice softened. "Because I saw the kind of man who lets his child lead with compassion. And because people like you don't ask for help, even when they should." Ethan felt something shift. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. Claire picked up her coat. "I'll be in touch," she said. "Soon." At the door, she paused. "Ethan." "Yes. Yesterday changed my life," she said. "Tomorrow might change yours." After she left, Ethan stood alone in the quiet house, listening to the fading sound of the limousine pulling away. For the first time since losing his job, he didn't feel invisible. But he also knew something had been set in motion. Something he wouldn't be able to stop. The next morning, Ethan woke up before his alarm. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening for Noah's breathing from the next room. The house was quiet. Too quiet. And even though the fear from the last few weeks hadn't vanished, something new had moved in beside it. An uneasy anticipation, like thunder waiting behind distant clouds. He got up, made oatmeal with the last of what they had, and watched Noah eat with a kind of happiness that only children can carry after a good day. Noah talked about the mall non-stop. "The water fountain was so big," he said, spoon in midair. "And the toy store had like 1,000,000 toys, Dad. And Claire said I could build a castle with the blocks." Ethan forced a smile. "You can build a whole city." Noah's eyes lit up. "And then you can help me make roads." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yeah," he said softly. "I will." After school drop-off, Ethan did what he'd been doing for days. He hunted for work. But the world felt different now, as if the limousine had left a mark on him that he couldn't wash off. He walked into a small contracting office with his resume, spoke to a manager, got the familiar polite smile. "We'll call you," the manager said. Ethan walked back out into the parking lot, already knowing they probably wouldn't. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at the screen, pulse rising. For a second he thought it might be the landlord. Or another rejection. He answered anyway. "Hello, Mr. Carter?" The voice was male, calm, professional. "Yes. My name is Daniel Raines," the man said. "I'm calling on behalf of the Whitmore Group." Ethan frowned. "The what?" There was a brief pause, like the caller expected Ethan to recognize the name. "We manage several companies across the state," Daniel said carefully. "Construction, logistics, property development." Ethan's mouth went dry. "Why are you calling me?" "Ms. Whitmore asked us to contact you," Daniel said. "She requested a formal review of your termination from your previous employer." Ethan's heartbeat thudded louder. "Claire." "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "Claire Whitmore." Hearing her full name made it real in a different way. Not Claire from the supermarket. Not Claire in the limo. Claire Whitmore. Someone with reach, influence, and people who made phone calls like this. Ethan gripped the phone tighter. "I didn't ask her to do that." "I understand," Daniel said. "But she insists." Ethan's throat felt tight. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Daniel replied. "We simply need you to come in and give a statement. If you have any documentation, text messages, names, anything that supports your claim, we'd like to review it." Ethan stood there in the sunlight, suddenly feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him again. "A statement," he repeated. "Yes, in person. Today, if possible." Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him to be careful. He'd been burned already. Framed. humiliated. People in power rarely called men like him unless there was something to take. But then he thought of Noah. Of Noah's small hand offering away their last money without fear. Maybe this was what passing it on actually looked like. Where? Ethan asked. Daniel gave him an address. Downtown, in one of the tallest buildings in the city. The kind of place Ethan had never stepped into unless he was delivering something or repairing something. After the call ended, Ethan sat in his truck for a long time. Then he started the engine. The lobby was everything Ethan expected. Marble floors, polished metal, quiet voices, security guards in crisp uniforms. He felt out of place immediately, like dust on clean glass. At the reception desk, he said his name. The receptionist's smile sharpened into something more respectful. "Of course, Mr. Carter," she said. "They're expecting you. They're expecting you." Ethan followed a man in a suit into an elevator that rose smoothly, silently, like it wasn't even climbing. When the doors opened, he stepped into a hallway of glass and soft lighting. He could see the city spread out below like a map. Daniel Raines greeted him with a handshake. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Ethan nodded. "I don't really understand why I'm here." Daniel didn't smile. "Because yesterday, your life intersected with Ms. Whitmore's," he said. "And when that happens, things tend to move quickly." He led Ethan into a conference room. A folder sat on the table. Ethan's name was printed on the front. Underneath it, in bold letters, was the name of his former company. And beside it, another name he hadn't expected to see. Mark Lewis. Ethan's stomach dropped. Daniel opened the folder slowly. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice steady, "we have reason to believe you were set up." Ethan stared at the page, barely breathing, because for the first time, someone powerful wasn't looking at him like a suspect. They were looking at him like a victim. And outside the glass wall, the city kept moving, completely unaware that Ethan's entire future was about to be rewritten. Ethan stayed seated long after Daniel stopped speaking. The conference room felt too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Outside the glass wall, traffic flowed like nothing in the world had changed. But inside, Ethan felt like he was standing in the middle of something fragile finally cracking open. Daniel slid a second document across the table. "These are internal audit records," he said. "Timestamps, inventory discrepancies, camera metadata." Ethan leaned forward slowly. His eyes moved over numbers and dates, his jaw tightening with every line. "That footage," Ethan said carefully, "it wasn't fake. I was in the tool shed." "Yes," Daniel replied. "But not when the tools went missing." He tapped the page. "The camera clock was altered, just enough to overlap your normal schedule." Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding for weeks. "So it really was Mark Lewis," Daniel finished. "We cross-checked badge access, equipment movement, and security overrides. He had access to all of it." Ethan closed his eyes for a second. Mark's voice echoed in his memory. "I trust the process." Daniel continued. "He was under financial pressure. Gambling debts. Missed payments. He'd been skimming small amounts for months. When inventory flagged a major discrepancy, he needed someone else's name on the paperwork." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "And they believed him." "They believed the paperwork," Daniel corrected. "People tend to trust documents more than people." Ethan nodded slowly. He'd lived that truth. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. Daniel hesitated. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're willing to move forward with a formal complaint." Ethan frowned. "Isn't that already happening?" Daniel met his gaze. "Not without you. We can present evidence, but your statement matters. And there may be consequences." "Like what?" "Legal action, public correction, reinstatement offers." Daniel paused. "Or settlement." Ethan leaned back in his chair. His mind raced. Reinstatement meant going back to the same company, the same walls, the same memories. Settlement meant money, but money alone wouldn't fix what had been taken from him. His dignity, his reputation, his sense of safety. "I don't want revenge," Ethan said quietly. Daniel nodded. That's usually what people say when they want justice. Ethan looked down at the papers again. "I want my name cleared. That's it." Daniel's expression softened. "Then that's what we'll focus on." They went through everything slowly. Ethan described the missing tools, the conversations, the subtle pressure. He spoke about Mark's comments, the shoulder claps, the warnings that hadn't sounded like warnings at the time. Daniel took notes, asked careful questions, never interrupted. By the time Ethan finished, his throat was dry and his shoulders ached like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. Daniel closed the folder. "We'll proceed," he said. "And Mr. Carter?" "Yes. This won't stay quiet." Ethan expected to feel afraid. Instead, he felt relief. When Ethan stepped back outside, the city air felt different, lighter. He sat in his truck for a long moment before starting the engine. His phone buzzed. "Claire." He stared at her name, then answered. "Hi," he said. "I heard," she replied gently. "Daniel called me." Ethan exhaled. "It's true. All of it." "I know," Claire said. "I'm sorry it happened to you." They were quiet for a second. "Thank you," Ethan said. "But you didn't have to do this." "I did," Claire replied. "Not because I could. Because it was right." Ethan hesitated. "What happens to him?" Claire didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was calm. "That part isn't up to me anymore." That night, Ethan cooked a real dinner. Not extravagant, just chicken, vegetables, and rice. But the smell filled the house, and Noah's face lit up when he saw the table. "Is this a special day?" Noah asked. Ethan smiled. "Yeah," he said. "It kind of is." After Noah went to bed, Ethan sat alone again. But this time, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a pause before something new. And somewhere across the city, a man named Mark Lewis was still going to work, still believing he'd won, not knowing that the truth had already started pulling him apart. The call came 3 days later. Ethan was in the middle of fixing a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet when his phone rang. He wiped his hands on a towel and checked the screen. Daniel Raines. He answered immediately. "Hello, Mr. Carter," Daniel said. His voice carried a different tone this time. Firmer, cleaner. "I wanted you to hear this directly from me." Ethan straightened. "Okay." "The investigation concluded this morning," Daniel continued. "Mark Lewis confessed." Ethan closed his eyes. Confessed. Not suspected. Not accused. Confessed. He admitted to altering inventory records, manipulating camera timestamps, and redirecting stolen equipment, Daniel said. He named no accomplices. Full responsibility. Ethan leaned against the counter, the hinge forgotten. "What happens to him?" "Termination, effective immediately," Daniel replied. "The company is also pursuing legal action. Criminal charges are likely." Ethan felt no satisfaction, no surge of victory, just a deep, quiet release, like something unknotted inside his chest. "And my record?" Ethan asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Cleared. Publicly. A formal statement will be issued. Your termination has been officially reclassified as wrongful dismissal." Ethan swallowed. "So, people will know?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Your name will be restored." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. He thought of the foreman's face, the office door closing, the looks on his co-workers' faces as he walked out, the shame he'd carried like a mark on his skin. "All right," Ethan said finally. Thank you. There's more, Daniel added. The company has offered reinstatement, with back pay. Ethan's first instinct was to say no, but then he paused. Or, Daniel continued, you can decline. Ms. Whitmore has already arranged interviews for you with 2 other firms. Both are aware of what happened. Both are interested. Ethan let out a slow breath. I'll think about it. That's wise, Daniel said. Take your time. After the call ended, Ethan sat down at the table and stared at the wall. When Noah came home from school, Ethan knelt in front of him and told him the truth, in simple words, that the man who'd lied had been caught, that Dad hadn't done anything wrong, that sometimes the truth takes time, but it does show up. Noah listened quietly. Then he smiled. So you're not in trouble? Ethan shook his head. No, buddy, I'm not. Noah wrapped his arms around Ethan's neck without warning. I knew it, he said confidently. You're a good guy. That night, Claire called. I wanted to tell you myself, she said. It's done. Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. They cleared my name. I know, Claire replied. I'm proud of you. He hesitated. For what? For not becoming bitter, she said. Most people do. Ethan thought about that. About how close he'd come. About how easy it would have been to shut down, to stop trusting. Someone reminded me, he said quietly, that kindness isn't weakness. There was a smile in her voice when she answered. Your son reminded both of us. They talked for a while longer. Not about money or jobs or investigations, but about normal things. About Noah's drawings. About cities they liked. About the strange ways people cross paths. After the call, Ethan stood at the window and looked out at the street. It looked the same. But he wasn't. Because for the first time since Lily died, he felt something steady beneath his feet. Not luck. Not rescue. Just truth. And it was finally on his side. Life didn't change overnight. Ethan didn't wake up rich. There was no sudden mansion, no dramatic transformation that erased the years of struggle. The house was still small, the streets still quiet, the mornings still early. But something fundamental had shifted. A week later, Ethan accepted a position with a different construction firm, one that knew his name before he walked through the door. The pay was fair. The hours were steady. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't treated like someone easily replaceable. On his first day, the foreman shook his hand and said, We've heard good things. Ethan nodded, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Respect. At home, Noah built his city on the living room floor. Roads, towers, bridges. He invited Ethan to help every night, and Ethan always did, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, laughing when things collapsed and rebuilding them stronger. One evening, Noah looked up at him and asked, Dad, do you think the lady was an angel? Ethan smiled softly. No, buddy. I think she was just someone who needed help. Noah thought about that. Then why did she help us back? Ethan paused, then answered honestly. Because that's how kindness works. It doesn't disappear. It moves. Claire stayed in their lives, not as a savior, but as a friend. Sometimes she visited. Sometimes she just called. She never made Ethan feel small or indebted. She listened. She laughed. She treated Noah like a person, not a symbol. One afternoon, as they sat at a park watching Noah climb the jungle gym, Claire said quietly, You know, my father still doesn't understand why I got so involved. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What did you tell him? I told him, she said, that for one day, I saw the world the way most people live in it. And one little boy reminded me what matters. Ethan watched Noah laugh, arms stretched wide, fearless. Weeks passed. Then months. The story of Mark Lewis faded from conversation, replaced by new routines and small joys. Ethan paid the rent on time. He bought groceries without counting every item twice. He slept through the night. But the greatest change wasn't financial. It was internal. Ethan no longer walked with his shoulders hunched. He spoke with quiet confidence. He trusted his instincts again. One evening, as Ethan tucked Noah into bed, Noah held up a folded piece of paper. "I made something," he said. It was a drawing, a small house, a big black car, and 3 stick figures holding hands. On the back, in careful letters, Noah had written, "Be kind, even when it's hard." Ethan swallowed, kissed Noah's forehead, and turned off the light. Later, standing alone in the hallway, he realized something important. The $15 had been gone in an instant. But what it bought had lasted. It restored his name. It protected his son. It brought truth into the light. And in the end, it gave Ethan something even greater than security. It gave him his faith in people back. Because sometimes, the smallest act of generosity becomes the moment everything finally turns.